Excited to talk to you today about plugs and patterns, but I want to talk first a little bit about who Hawkeye Industries is. Hopefully you're familiar with us, you know a little bit about us. Allie, will you go ahead and pop over to the next slide for me? So Hawkeye Industries is most well known for our Duratech line of coatings, and we will talk a lot about those today, plugs and patterns. It's our bread and butter. It's how we originated. It's where our material first really got its start. And so Duratech has a well-known name in the composites industry. We also manufacture, sell, and service Aqua-Buff, which is our polishing and compound line, as well as Styrosafe, which includes a resin and a primer. We'll talk through the primer portion of the Styrosafe line today. Our materials, as you can see on the screen, are utilized in a degree of sectors within the composites industry, from automotive to aerospace to wood furniture and manufacturing, all across the board, and certainly marine, art and design, pools and spas. So in the plug and pattern world, you know, all of the composite part manufacturing includes plugs and patterns. So there's a lot of flexibility across industry sectors for the use of our materials. As I mentioned, I'm joined by my colleagues, Jody Wise and Rob Smothers. This is our territory map for North America, but I know we have some guests on here that are visiting and joining us from outside of North America. So welcome everyone, regardless of where you're at. Thank you for joining us. Jody Wise, can you say hi to us, Jody?
Hello, everybody.
All right. Jody Wise is our Western Regional Sales Manager. He covers the states there that you can see, the states and provinces you can see there in the gray, pretty much from the Rocky Mountains of North America to the West Coast on the Pacific, including Hawaii. Jody's contact information will be up and available later so that you can jot down his contact information if you're in that area. On the opposite side of North America, on the eastern seaboard, we've got Rob Smothers. Hello, Rob.
Hey, good morning or afternoon, wherever you're calling in from.
Yes, and good evening to some of our international customers
Good
too.
evening.
So Rob covers our southeastern section of North America. And so if you happen to be in those states that are highlighted in red, those are the territories that Rob covers, and his contact information will be available. I mentioned my name. I'm Shelly Benyon. I'm the general manager here. I also cover the areas in dark gray that you're seeing on your screen, as well as our international distribution and customers. So if you are in the dark gray section or outside of North America, I'm your contact person. And all three of us, we are here to help. So whether you talk to me or to Jody or to Rob, or sometimes you get on a conference call and all three of us are on there. We love what we do. We love being able to support you and your processes. So anything we can do to help improve those, we're here to do, which is why we're here today. So this is our agenda for our webinar today. We're going to talk over a general overview of plugs and patterns. We'll go through Duratech products for plug and pattern making. We'll talk about a couple of products, some additives that we think that you'll enjoy that will help improve various aspects of your plug and pattern making. And then the two favorite areas that folks love to hear us talk about, the best practices and maybe the things that we can avoid doing or adjust to get better outcomes from. So we'll talk about best practices and mistakes to avoid. At the very end, we'll open it up to questions. Now, if you are familiar with Zoom and have utilized Zoom before, you know there's a question, there's a chat box, a question and answer box. As we are talking, please feel free to ask the questions that come up if you have them. We have our amazing marketing associate, Allison, who has put the presentation together. She and I will be watching that chat and trying to capture all of the questions as they come in. And we tend to get into our little rhythm, and then something comes up and you've got it on your mind, you want to ask us. So that chat question box is really useful. You can pop it in there while it's fresh on your mind. And then when we get to the Q&A, we'll go through those and read through those and certainly open it up to any additional questions that we may have or that you may have. Jody, Rob, anything else before we talk about Duratech? I cover our
I think you
territories,
covered
right?
it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good to go.
All right. So there are a lot of options out there for your coatings, whether it's a primer, a top coat, or an intermediary product. And we get asked very often, why would someone choose Duratec? What are the benefits? And as we go through the actual processes today, you'll hear us talk about some of the reasons these why these are important. So we've got up there air cure chemistry. It's MEKP catalyzed, so it's an easy 2% additive for a full and complete cure. It's highly compatible, and we'll talk about that a lot today, both with substrates and with additional coatings or secondary materials that you may choose to use in your process. Exacting chemistry. Hawkeye, in fact, I think I skipped it on the slide before, but Hawkeye was started in 1983. We have a long-standing, very solid history of quality materials that have been put to use time after time across industry, across the world. We have global distribution. And so there's real tremendous science behind our products and throughout our production and the solid history of use. So you'll hear more about each of these as we kind of talk through the processes. But these are some of the reasons why someone would choose Duratec in their process. So we're going to kind of tag team our presentation a little bit. Jody, Rob, and I will each take turns. That will help familiarize each of you with who we are. And you should see the name pop up. As I mentioned before, feel free to ask questions as they come up. We're going to kind of start from the beginning, from the substrate side, and walk our way all the way through the final finish, polishing and getting a plug or pattern ready for use. So we're going to kind of move the conversation around. Rob, why don't you tell us a little bit about the various substrates that are out there and when or why to choose one?
Well, you can see them on your screen, and the first beginning to start with when you're deciding to build your plug is, what are you going to build that plug out of? So as you can see, you have multiple choices, and a lot of it depends on the type of plug that you want to build for the type of mold that you want to build. Somebody may want to build a down and dirty, one-time use plug. They don't want to put a lot of cost into it, so you can start with an EPS foam, and then we'll get into which primers to use that fit best with that foam. I see a lot of plugs out there that are made out of wood, tooling board, or MDF, if you're going to be CNCing these parts. And again, what it comes down to, are you doing a one-off where you're going to build a plug down and dirty? You want to build the mold off of that to build one part, and then you're done with that, right up to a top of the line plug, because you're going to build a Class A mold that's going to get used thousands and thousands of times. So all depending on what type of plug you're building for what type of parts, this is where you decide what type of substrate you're going to use for that part. As you can see here, we have two types of sealer that you can use, that you can put on top of these, especially if you're going to use an epoxy paste that bonds a lot of these parts together, or a epoxy skin coat. Then you'd want to tie in a sealer over that prior to putting in the primer to give you a little better adhesion. Again, depending on if it's just a straight plug that you're going to build a mold off of, or if it's one that's going to be run through an autoclave, run where the heat is going to get above 200 degrees. That's going to depend on the type of sealer as well as the type of primers that you would use building that plug.
So Rob, I know that we'll get asked this question. Sorry, Allie. I know we'll get asked this question, and you touched on it a little bit, but why do we have that optional up there next to apply the sealer?
Well, again, it's depending on how hot that part's going to get. Whether it's, like I said, a regular open mold plug that you're just going to apply a sealer over the top, and then you come back and put your primer on there. It's just a tie coat that's going to help with the adhesion, especially on some parts where you're bonding those pieces together to build that plug, and you've got an epoxy paste that's down there. A lot of times, some of the primers don't really want to bond that well to an epoxy paste, so we put a sealer down on there as a tie coat, and that just helps give you better adhesion. So your choices are, you can use a polyester sealer or a vinyl ester sealer. we recommend the vinyl ester sealer anytime you're going to be either building a thick mass of glass and it's going to be above that 200 degrees, or you're going to run that and post cure it through an oven and you're going to reach 220, 230, 40 degrees. Then you want to make sure you're running with a vinyl ester sealer.
Thank you.
When we get into the primers, again, if you've got a lot of lines on that pattern when you're building your plug because of glue lines, bond lines, whatever it is, then basically we've had two types of high build primer that you can use at this time. Our first is what we call our tan high build base primer. And this is for if you're going to machine these parts because it cuts a lot easier, does not chip. It is a little bit harder to sand than our second primer that more set up for hand application. But it does sand very well. You can take this to 400. You can take it up even higher. Get a nice smooth finish on that. But again, if you're going to be using this on a CNC machine, this would be the high build primer to go to. And here you can see the multiple primers that we have. And the 061 was the second one that I was talking about, and that is the Easy Sand Primer. We sell a lot of this primer. It's very commonly used in the industry because a lot of guys that are going to hand sand, this is very easy to sand. You can build up to 40 to 60 mils with this material, so it'll cover all your bond lines. Any defects you have in the part, you can shape it, you can sand it, and you can polish this down if you want to finish with the primer and take it to a nice high gloss and actually build your tool right off of the primer itself. So we've got, and we also have this in a vinyl ester version, which is our basically a surface primer. This is, it's going to be, because it's a vinyl ester, as everybody knows, it's going to be more durable than a polyester. It's going to be a little bit harder to sand. But again, anywhere you've got an application where you're going to be above 200 degrees, this is where you want to go.
So I know Jody and Rob we've done webinars a lot together, so they know that I like to kind of open this up a little bit, but this seems to be, the primer selection seems to be the place where a lot of our end use customers, those of you out there that are getting ready to do the plug and pattern work, where making the choice on which primer to use can get a little confusing. One, because our color selection is limited to grays and blacks. So sometimes you've spoken to someone and they say they used a gray Duratec primer, but they're not sure which one. Jody and Rob, how do you help a customer who is, let's say that this is a plug or pattern that's going to see some extended use. It's not a one-off. It's not, a quick and dirty, Rob, like you said before, a quick and dirty one-off that they're just going to use one time. How do we make the determination between the primer selections? What are some good places to stop and consider?
One of the things that comes up frequently is what's available, what can I get? What I can tell people is there's a lot of overlap in what these products will do. Unless you're going for the longest term usability and high temperatures, these products can be used almost interchangeably. Yes, there'll be differences, and some do some jobs better than others, but they're all within the user window to get a good part. It's not like you can't use one. The Easy Sand, you can polish it and make a great looking part. It's not quite as glossy of a finish as our surface primer, but it's close. The surface primer is just a bit better. Now, is the surface primer as easy to sand as the Easy Sand? Not quite, but it's not a huge difference. Sometimes it's nuanced differences, and sometimes it makes absolutely no difference, but it can be confusing to a potential user of the product because they're just not sure where to go, and they read all the literature and it says, I still don't have an idea which way to go. So of the three on to the left, the one on the right is a little bit different than the others, but the three that you see to the left, those all three of those are interchangeable to some degree, and you can blend them together. If you had half a can of one and half a can of the other, you can blend them together and use them. Everything except the products that are used for EPS foam are 100% compatible with each other.
So Rob, on the far right, Jody mentioned it. We've got the 707019, the Styrosafe Shield. That one's a little, kind of going back to the Muppets days. One of these things is not like the other. The Styrosafe Shield is not quite like the other Duratec primers. Will you talk a little bit about that one?
No, and that's pretty much specific to EPS foam, lightweight foams. And the difference with that is this material itself will not etch or destroy the foam when you're building that part. You get it where you machined it down or sanded it down to the exact dimensions you need. The last thing you want to do is put a primer on there that starts to etch or eat away at that and distorts the entire shape of the plug that you're trying to build. So this material itself was specifically designed for EPS foams, and it is a primer. It's going to be a little bit harder to sand than our standard primer, but it's basically a sealer and a primer all built into one to go over, again, to go over your EPS type foam. And that can be machined, or it can be, like I said, hand sanded. It's just going to be a little tougher to sand than our standard surface primers.
And you've got some customers doing some pretty substantial size EPS plugs out of using this product.
We've got a lot of plug builders out there that buy quite a bit of the Styro Shield. And yes, this is what they choose to use because it does not distort their plugs. It's a lot of time and a lot of effort to get the dimensions on those things exactly where they need to be. The last thing you need is to have something that sprays over the top that distorts it.
Yeah, absolutely. Allie, will you pop over to the next slide for that picture of a primed plug? This happens to come from one of the student organizations that we work with. They did a spectacular job using our Duratec surface primer. So I just want to recap a little bit about what Jody and Rob just said about the primer selection, that oftentimes for those of you who are end use customers doing this yourselves, some of you joining us on the call are our partners from our distribution companies. Sometimes that first determination as to which primer to use comes from which one is locally available. So find out what your distribution partner has, and then talk to us about that product's use in the application that you're looking at. So Jody, once we have our plug in that beautiful condition that we just saw, what's next?
Well, we've got several different top coats you can apply to these. And this is the next step. On some of the primers, you can just polish the primer and call it good. Or if you want a much better finish, or you want a lasting surface on there where this is going to be used multiple times, maybe you want to take 10 or 15 molds off of it. Maybe this is going to be stored for 3 decades and you're going to use it frequently. Now you can go to a top coat, which will give you a much higher gloss, better durability. It will retain its gloss long term. Whereas the primers, if you polish the primer and wax it and make a part off of it, it's going to lose some gloss every time you pull apart. So after a few parts, you're going to have to repolish it. With the top coats, you've got the option of putting a surface on there that will be long term. You could pull hundreds of parts off there and it's still going to look great. The difference between the two, as you can see, there's the polyester version that is good to about 180 degrees F, and then the vinyl ester version, which goes to about 285 F, which gives you good opportunity because a lot of post cures are in the 250 degree range. So you can achieve that without much of a problem, and people do it frequently with those products. And they spray out quite well. They level and flow. There's not a great deal of sanding. This isn't a product like tooling gel coat where it goes on and there's a lot of orange peel and you've got to sand like crazy for a week and you just sanded off half of what you put on just so you could get all the orange peel out. This is going to level and flow more like automotive paint. Now, the first time you spray it, is it going to look like automotive paint? Probably not, but that is achievable. It can be very smooth. It will cure with a high gloss. I've got customers that don't do anything to it. They spray it on, and that's their mold finish, just like that. It will have a very high gloss, and then they prep it and make their parts off of it. It just depends on what the objectives are on this particular part you're making, how far you want to go and how good you want to make it. And these top coats are also good for refinishing existing molds. And again, you sand it, primer it if needed, very aggressively, and then you can put one of these top coats over that and reduce the amount of sanding needed compared to gel coat. It speeds up the process. Sandpaper is extremely expensive, and so is the labor. And I'm lazy. I don't like sanding, so this helps a lot. Speeds it up tremendously.
So while we're looking at this beautiful top coated plug that we've got here from one of our customers actually overseas, Jody, you said something very interesting. You said, and Allie, I made you the thing that I do where I make us dance back a couple of slides, if you don't mind, to the plug. Right, one more right there. So Jody, you said one more, thanks. So you said something interesting. You said, if you want to top coat it to provide a more durable, long lasting plug or pattern that's going to see, multiple molds being pulled or being stored and used over time, you can, but you could also just tool off of the primer.
Right. You can just sand and polish this and make a part right off of that. If you're going to do a one-off, and this primer isn't even sanded or prepped. In reality, you could go right off of that surface if that's all you needed. And in a lot of industrial situations, that's what's done. It just depends on what kind of finish you want. Now, typically you would sand this, polish it, make your part. And if this was just a one-off part or two parts, you're not really concerned about how long it lasts. You don't have to spend a lot of time prepping everything. And again, we have a whole lineup of products. You don't have to use every single one of them in the process. You can skip around and figure out what's going to work best for your individual product. I've got customers that use just the sealer on MDF. They just paint, brush, roll, spray, whatever, right onto MDF with a sealer, and that's their mold finish. They wax that and use it because it gives a good release off of that. So that's what situation is. This was in South Korea, a week-long training course, class of people that were into this composites course, and we started with 2 of these hulls and sprayed multiple different types of primer down. And then as rookies, we sprayed both hulls with the black vinyl ester top coat. And this is what it looks like right out of the gun when sprayed by somebody that this is their first day spraying the product.
Not too shabby.
I was just mixing it and handing the gun to the next person. And this is the kind of results they got.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to ask too, just really quick on that. Rob, we talked a little bit about the Styro-Shield. Can these top coats be used on EPS foam with the Styro-Shield?
Once you apply the Styro-Shield, basically that EPS foam is sealed, and you can use whichever top coat your heart desires, because now you've got a protected plug.
So if
vinyl ester, polyester, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Or if I was particularly interested in something, I mean, we all love Duratec, but if I was interested in something other than Duratec, I could also do that over the Styro-Shield.
Yeah, once the Styro-Shield is down and cured, sand it to where you want it to be, which is take it to 400, take it to 600, whatever you want to sand it down to get the finish that you're looking for. You can pretty much coat that with anything. We prefer you coat it with the Duratec, but yes, you can use other products.
Yes, we do. I mean, that's what we're here for. So we love the products that we sell. Speaking of products that we sell, there are a couple to make the processes a little bit easier. Jody, will you talk to us a little bit about, we talked about being able to tool right off of the primer plug. The high gloss additive is a companion to that, yes?
Yeah, this product, it can go in any gel coats or virtually any of our products except for the Styrosafe products line for EPS foam. But you can add this to our primers, you can add it to top coats, you can add it to gel coats, and it will reduce the viscosity and let it air cure. It will typically give a higher gloss. If somebody wants their primer to yield a higher gloss, like this person's buffing here, they can add some of the clear additive, the 904-001, to the primer. It will spray and level and flow better. It will sand a little bit harder, not tremendously harder, but a little bit harder, but you need to do less sanding. But it will yield a higher gloss when you buff it. So you can fine tune the product to whatever you want to do in that realm. And then the reducer, most of the time you don't need to add a reducer to these products, but you can. It's an option if you want it to level and flow better. Sometimes you might use the clear additive. Sometimes you might use the reducer. And you don't need much. 5% typically does it. And a little bit goes a long way. These already have a relatively low viscosity. Low viscosity compared to products in the composites world, primers, gel coats, things like that. They're higher viscosity than automotive primers. And that's where some people get confused and they feel more comfortable adding a reducer and spraying it that way. And it works. So it's up to you how you want to spray it and get good results.
I do love, Jody, I've heard you say it before. I've heard you say if we wanted it in there to begin with, it would be there.
Yeah.
So with the reducer, that it's absolutely an option to help compensate if you feel like you need it. Maybe your equipment, maybe your nozzle or your tip size is a little too small and you need some support to get the material through that. But otherwise, the products are great as they are.
Right.
Yeah. After that.
And then we've got the options of buffing and polishing compounds. And there are various ones that we carry, the 1000 and the 2000. The 1000 is a very aggressive, fast cut compound. And the 2000 will yield a very nice gloss, and on whites and things like that, it's probably all you're ever going to need. And if you're trying to polish out some 600 scratches, the 1000 works the best. Now, sanding out scratches, if you take one of our primers and sand it on day one, it's going to sand really easy. And the sooner you polish it, the easier it's going to polish. It's going to sand out those buffing scratches easier. In some of our literature, we say wait 8 hours or so. And the reason we do that is because there can be some solvents or some additional curing going on. I kind of cheat that a little bit because I will sand and polish as soon as possible. What it means is I may have to polish it again the next day or sooner if the surface changes any, which it can from residual cure. So that's why we say wait 8 hours. But sometimes I get lucky and I don't have to touch it, and other times I have to rebuff it because it might lose its gloss overnight from additional cure. So just the reason we say that is it could change the look or the surface after 24 hours. But like I said, I don't like sanding, so if I can get it all done early the first day, and then the next day, if it changes a bit or loses some gloss, I just buff it again. Now, these compounds are water soluble, so one of the nice things about it is you can put some on the part and you don't need much. Put it on the pad, move it around. Don't just hit the trigger and spray it all over everybody in the room and all the other things that are around. Move it around a bit. If it starts to dry out after a couple of minutes, you can just spritz a little water on it from a from a squirt bottle or something, or pour a little on it. It'll rejuvenate it, and you don't have to add any more. And you can do that several times, and you need to use much compound. So that's an added bonus. There's not waxes and oils and solvents in there like some other ones where they're hiding the scratches, because one of the common things that happens is you buff a part and it looks absolutely great, and then a week later it's dull again. This happens a lot in the boat detailing world, and it's because the compound didn't remove all the scratches, and the oils and waxes and things in it filled in all the defects and made it look really good, but in reality it didn't last very long. So just be aware of that. Ours doesn't have those things in it, so it's kind of what you see is what you get. If you do this outside, don't let it dry in the sun. You won't like that. So just do small areas and see what works to get your part looking the way you want it before you do a big area.
Yeah.
So do
Well,
a
and
1
with
foot by 1 foot square or something.
with a plug and pattern application, I could see where that's really useful to make sure
Right.
you're seeing your true surface, so that you're not then creating a mold surface that has some sort of defect that you didn't catch because the polish had filled it up.
And what we see in the tooling end of it is a lot of times they'll choose a sandpaper, and they'll choose a series of grits that they want to use to get to what they feel is going to be the right shine. But what they didn't know in the beginning was that first sandpaper that they used had left some marks in the surface, some swirls and some deep gouges, and they never sanded those out, and they're doing a 26-foot mold or something, and they finish with their final polishing and go, wow, we still see scratch marks. Now they have to start over again. You're better off just do a small area, figure out what's going to work exactly right with the sandpaper you have, with the compound you have, with the buffers you have, what you're doing, and figure it out. Now you know the process on the rest of the part that will get you the desired result without having to rework things.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Jody. So we're going to open it up to the three of us here and talk a little bit about some of the best practices. We've hinted at them along the way. This is really where Jody, Rob, and I spend a lot of our time in conversation with you. We want you to spend as much quality time developing your plug and pattern as necessary, and no more. We want you to be able to create something that you can get into mold production or build your one-off, whatever it happens to be. So some of the best practices that we have up there are product selection with the end in mind. Jody and Rob both touched on this, that a lot of our conversations we will start when we're talking with you, or when our distribution partners are talking with you, they'll start with, what are you trying to achieve? How we direct you. If you're trying to build a low-cost one-off plug for a one-time mold pull, that conversation and our product selection is going to look very different than, like Jody mentioned before, if you have a plug or pattern that you're going to hold on to for multiple years and make 10, 15, 50 molds off of. We talk a lot about the right equipment. And so, Rob, I wanted to ask, we talked about primers, we talked about top coats. Can someone use the same equipment throughout this process? What does that look like?
You can, and again, that's where we come in, where we're looking at the thinning agent, because you may be running with a 2.0 or a 2.2 tip. You may not have an issue spraying a top coat with that, because it's not going to have the same amount of filler that a primer would have. You're going to have a harder time spraying a high build primer with a 2.2 tip than you would with a surface primer. And that's just because of the viscosity and the makeup of the products. So this is where the thinning agent comes in, as to get the best spray out of that gun. Or, which is the best practice, is have multiple tips available. Most common tip where you can spray the majority of our products is about a 2.5 tip. That usually you can spray right out of the can. You don't have to really make any adjustments to the material. But it's available if you need to. And it's gauging your air pressures, it's gauging your pattern size, it's gauging everything along with that when you get to what types tips you're going to be using with that. So it all comes into play. It's no different than spraying gel coat or your resins and everything else. It's pick the right tip size, pick the right air pressures, and move along that way. So it doesn't all have to be done with HVLP gun. We've got some people that spray out of hot pots. We got some people that spray with the airless system. So it just depends on the size of your project, and it depends on what you have available to use.
And I'd like to say that what he mentioned about tip sizes and adjustments, there's lots of adjustments on that gun. Play with them all. Put a little uncatalyzed material in the gun and get yourself familiar with it if you're not sure. And turn those knobs. Turn the air pressure up, turn it down, higher volume, lower volume, experiment, see how much you can hose on and have it sag or not sag, or blow it around on the surface. Do a bunch of things wrong so you know what the limits are. So when you're spraying your part, it's like, okay, I know I can get this result. It's difficult for somebody that sprayed automotive primers to get used to spraying something that's higher in viscosity. It's different gun adjustments, different settings on the gun, different tip sizes. And the same thing goes for somebody that's familiar with spraying gel coat, because ours is lower in viscosity than gel coat. So it sprays more like an automotive paint but we're right in between. And that confuses people sometimes if they're very familiar with one or the other. And we get a lot of those questions.
We absolutely do. And we love the questions. We welcome the questions. Allie, will you pop back for just one more second? So we talked previously, both Jody and Rob mentioned the goal for shininess, what your goal is or preference for shininess, and that gloss level may or may not matter to you. So that's certainly a best practice to keep in mind, that if you are looking for a Class A finish on your mold surface or on your parts, you have to start with that from the plug and pattern side. The one thing, the very bottom best practice that I did want to just touch on, and we get asked this a lot as people are getting ready to build their molds off of their plug and pattern surfaces, is just what mold release and tooling gel coat matter. And oftentimes folks will ask what's compatible with our products. Our products, when they're fully cured and on the surface of a plug or pattern, are highly compatible with whatever you want to do next. But what matters is the mold release and the tooling gel coat or the top coat that you use from there. Jody, will you just touch on that briefly?
Yeah, the semi-permanent mold releases are very popular out there. They're expensive, but they work very, very well. The problem is they work too well for most tooling applications. You do not want to risk pre-release or getting fish eyes when making a tool. You want a good, reliable finish, and wax does that. A nice paste wax with no silicone in it will do that. Now, a lot of people will use the semi-permanents and then put a coat or two of paste wax over the top. That works. Whatever you're comfortable with. All of the mold release products work, but you need to read what it says on the can, because there's no generic way to apply a mold release. Even the same brand of mold release of a paste wax, they may make 3 or 4 different paste waxes by one brand, but the application method could be different on every one of them. Make sure you follow what they're saying. Use the right rags. Use the right amount of time between coats. Things like that. It's not just wipe on, wipe off, and that's what happens a lot of times, and people run into problems.
Thank you for covering that. So kind of on the flip side, we've got some tools and resources to do the job well. Some of the things that we've got up there on the screen for you to avoid are choosing a weak substrate for your plug and pattern use. And that just comes down to what Rob started with at the very beginning. Know what it is you're trying to accomplish and choose the substrate that's going to match and support that. We talked about the sealer and its use in sealing up and plugging up the substrate of your choice. That will help reduce porosity, as will choosing a top coat rather than tooling off of the primer. The primer will certainly reduce the porosity, especially in conjunction with a sealer, and a top coat just improves that. I kind of grabbed my little sample can. It's totally empty, but We get so many questions from folks who are using outdated material. So if you've never seen a Duratec can, it looks a little, this is a quart size. So every container looks a little bit different, but there's always, hopefully you can see this, a lot number and a manufacturing date. And really, when you're getting your material, either from us, if you're one of our partners, or from your distributor, you want to check that and you want to be familiar with it. Maybe even get a big red Sharpie and make that clearer. Material past its shelf life can be used. That isn't an expiration date like your yogurt in your fridge per se, but you want to make sure that if it is past the 6 month shelf life, that you are paying attention to what the material in the can looks like, and perhaps even reaching out and talking to us about it. And then Rob, will you just touch on the failure to reinforce for durability? I know we talked about this as a group, but once they've made their plug and pattern and they're getting ready to do the tool off of it, what do they need to consider?
Well, you got to make sure you have the strength and you reinforce that plug that it's going to hold up when you go to build that tool. Otherwise, everything you did to build that plug, if it's not reinforced to handle the, I mean, the tooling gel coat's easy. That's a thin film that's going over the top. But then usually you're going to skin it, you're going to bulk it up, you're going to reinforce that tool because that's your final part. If that plug hasn't been reinforced, you're going to change the dimensions on it, and you're going to change the dimensions of that tool. And basically, when you pull that part, you're going to have issues. You're not going to have the tool the way you wanted it. And either that comes down to is every time you build a part, you're going to have to go in and do repair every part that comes off of that. So you want to take the time with the mold, with the plug, and make sure they're done right, make sure they're durable. Otherwise, there's a lot of time, effort, and money that went in that still going to cost you time, money, and effort on every part that gets pulled off of there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So a little bit more of that, begin with the end in mind.
Correct.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. You guys have done a great job. You guys, meaning the attendees, thank you again for joining us. You've done a great job of putting in some questions for us to answer. So we're going to jump over and answer some of those. If things have come up as you've been listening to us talk, this is a great moment. You have the three of us here. You've got our time and attention. So Dustin asked a couple of great questions, and I'm going to put them together kind of in the process. But starting with, we're going to go back to base primer, Jody and Rob. 707-051 is the product number. When you are building with the base primer, what's the thickness you can build to with that product? It's a pop quiz from our technical data sheet.
If you're using the base primer, I mean, you can build it up pretty darn thick depending on what you're doing. I believe on the data sheet, it's 1/8 of an inch.
Yeah.
You can go thicker, but what you have to be careful of, if there's a lot of movement, it may crack. It's not like it's a product that is reinforced with anything. It's not designed for that purpose, but you can build it up quite thick and machine it or sand it down. It's made to hide a lot of ugly, and you can spray it on a surface very thick and knock it down with a longboard or CNC it and get a shape that you want. It's not a great surface for a mold purposes, but it could be used that way. It's just not a great one. It's designed to be sanded and have something sprayed over the top. So,
okay.
Yeah, 051, 061, same thing. They're designed to be built pretty heavy so you can sand down and basically get rid of any of the defects, bond lines, anything that's there. That's what it's designed for. And like Jody said, on one-off molds, we've got a lot of customers out there that will take the high build, cut it 50-50 with our high gloss additive, and basically turn it into their own surface primer.
Okay. So kind of building off of that, and I'm going to try speaking a little bit louder. I got a note that said it was hard to hear me, and I am so sorry if it is hard to hear me. Kind of building off of that, once you've moved past the base primer and you're applying the 707, let's go with the surface primer, the 707-002. At what point, if we're going to use the primer surface as our mold surface, at what point do we need to stop sanding in order to avoid creating pre-release? Like, how far out do we need to go?
A lot of people are happy with the finish they get at 400. You can take out 600, 800. It depends on how smooth you want to go. On a plug, most people won't go past 1,000. Otherwise, yeah, you're getting to the point where it's almost going to look like it's so polished that you can run into the issue of pre-release. At 400, at 600, 800, you should have most of the scratches taken out of there. You should have all of the defects taken out of there. And again, depending on what type of mold you're looking to build, we've got a few people that will take it to 1,000. I don't think I'd take it any more than that for a plug.
Okay. Jody, any additional or different advice?
No, again, I don't like sanding. I would maybe go to 600 and buff it, and that would be it. If you're going with primer as a finish, you're probably not looking for the absolute highest gloss to begin with on your mold. And you may be buffing your mold the way you've designed it. You know you're going to need to do some work on that mold finish. And if you're going to do that, don't waste your time getting the plug perfect. Now, it can be done both ways. Some people want a perfect plug so they don't have to touch their mold. And that's a very good way to do it. But we live in the real world. It's done both ways. You know, sometimes you make mistakes and you didn't plan on it, but you got to rework it. And so it happens. So there's not a right or wrong. It's just they all work.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna borrow some of your language, and Jody, that's one of the things I love about working with Jody and Rob is just the real life realities. Jody and Rob have been in shops all across the country over years, and so we've seen it all. And like Jody said, there's not really a wrong way. It just is what you get out of your choice. But Jody, you had mentioned gloss, and that led me to Brian's question. Brian asked, can the high gloss additive be used as a top coat? I actually got this question via text from one of my customers as well, Brian, this morning. This is an interesting one. Can it be used as a top coat? Who wants to take that?
The high gloss additive itself is a top coat, or
Yes.
mixed into the top coat?
The high gloss additive as a standalone top coat.
That's a tricky one because there are customers that use it that way. It's not something we recommend or promote because it wasn't designed as a standalone finish, but it does work. And depending on the situation, it might be the right product for you. We have customers that do it and love it. They've done it for years and years and years, and they buy drums of it, and that's how they use it. But it's not something we're going to say is the best way to do it because it wasn't designed for that. So
Was not.
you're
Was
on your
not
own.
designed for it.
If it works for your application. Now, you can add it to the top coats and it will make them level and flow better and less sanding again. But that's just customizing the existing product and not using it as a standalone product.
Yeah. I love to reiterate the additive portion of its name. It's designed to be an additive. Speaking of additives, Simon asked a great question about the reducer. Simon, you asked whether 39 UCE, which is our Duratec reducer, whether it's compatible with gel coat. And the answer is yes, it is compatible with gel coat. Simon also noted that they're currently thinning with acetone, which is incredibly common, very common again around the industry. And every reducer seems to have its benefits and its or its strengths, I should say, and its weaknesses. Jody, will you just talk real quickly about the weakness of using acetone or what it might not do for us?
And that's, again, when you get to the additive and what works and what doesn't, very small amounts of anything probably aren't going to cause you problems. Acetone is one of those things that people do it frequently and it can cause some problems that they don't really know exist. Acetone's an inhibitor. If there's a very small amount in there, it will evaporate away almost before it gets to the mold surface or the part surface during the spray application. If there's excess acetone in there, it will act as an inhibitor and keep the product from curing. Now, in the gun, that helps. But once you spray it on the part and it gets trapped in there, that's not good. You've got an undercured surface. And because it doesn't react with anything, any of that trapped acetone eventually has to come out, and it leaves a softer surface, a porous surface. Depending on what you're using it in, you may see the porosity, you may not see the porosity, but it's there. So acetone is one of those things. If you put 3% acetone in there, it's probably not going to cause a problem. But it doesn't really do what you think you want it to do. It will make it come out of the tip better, but it won't level and flow better unless you put a lot of acetone in there. Our reducer is designed to reduce the product well, and it's the same blend of ingredients that go into our product to begin with, so it's compatible, but it doesn't evaporate as quickly as acetone. So when you spray it, it allows for the product to level and flow better. With acetone, sometimes you end up with a popcorn type finish, especially if you highly atomize it. The acetone will evaporate rapidly, and it will take some of the other solvents with it. And now what hits the surface is actually a higher viscosity than what you want. Whereas our reducer doesn't do that. Now, there are other reducers you can use. Our reducer, again, has to meet a performance spec and a purity spec, whereas what you buy at Home Depot will work, but you may not get the same product every time. Things like MEK and other solvents, there's no real formula for those. They're whatever solvent that a manufacturer wants to throw into the can that day to get rid of in the byproducts of manufacturing other products. And that's real world. One of our chemists, that's what he did prior to coming to us, was one of his jobs was sorting through and what could they turn into MEK or something else. And because it's just a broad term for a general category. So it will work, but you may not get the same result every time. Whereas with our product, you'll get the same result every time. But people use MEK and lacquer thinner, and there's lots of different lacquer thinners out there. Again, it's a generic name for a blend of products frequently. It will work, but we can't guarantee exactly how it's going to work every time. But you got to use what you got to use sometimes.
Absolutely. Very fair point. And Simon clarified process a little bit. And so that's one of the things that for us is really important when we're talking to you, is when we understand your process, we can kind of help fine tune it or change our advice accordingly. So Simon, I really appreciate that you asked the questions and then clarified a little bit in terms of the process. We're going to keep answering questions. We've got some good ones. So if you have a couple of questions up there, don't leave us, but I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So I'm going to ask Allison to just pop up the slide that shows this is our resources page, and this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be sent out to you, so you can rewatch it. You can pause, you can rewind if I'm speaking too quickly, or if you need to go back over a point that Jody or Rob made. But you can also find a tremendous amount of resources on our website. And then Allie, will you just pop up the last slide with our contact information? So please, if you don't need to leave, don't leave. We're going to keep talking and answering questions, but now you have our contact information. If there's any way we can help, please do not hesitate to reach out, including talking to us about your process and looking for samples of material to trial out. That is something we love to support, so please don't hesitate. So Jody, Rob, a few more questions that we've had come in. These are great. Keep them coming. Let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to read this question. Hopefully I get this correctly. In response to the answer regarding when to stop sanding, if a tooler applies top coat over the primer, buffs and polishes it to a high gloss, and then a mold is pulled from that surface finish, the mold shouldn't have to be buffed? ?
Again,
In theory, correct.
Okay.
But again, there's a lot of shrinkage going on at certain times. It depends on your gel coat. It depends on the materials the plug's made of. Because if you're using a low shrink resin that reaches a high temperature, 200 degrees F in the cure process, and the materials you made the plug out of don't hold up to those temperatures, then there's a possibility that the surface may change and you may have to do some work on it. But if you were doing all of this in a perfect world, yes, you could pull it off and you may not have to buff it at all. It could be just exactly the finish you want. Now, I will say that in a lot of projects, the first thing people say is, I want the best finish possible. Well, the best finish possible, it can be done. It can look like an absolute mirror finish. The problem is, to get 90% of the way there, it's not hard. To get that last 10%, well, you're never going to get it, 100%, but you can get it into the 95, 98% range. But it takes a lot more work, a lot more attention to detail. You have to use the exact right materials. So back to what do you need to do that part when it's, to get a good finish on it? Do you need to buff it? Not necessarily. Just depends on how good you want it to look. You can achieve. Now, on an 80-foot hole mold, that's going to be a lot more difficult than doing it on an RC car hull mold or a RC boat mold that's 3 feet long. That's going to be comparatively easy. So there you go. No answer.
Rob, anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, Jody pretty much covered it, but basically it comes down to what that mold looks like when you pull that apart. And a lot of it's going to have to do with the type of tooling gel coat that was sprayed and what you're putting behind that tooling gel coat as you build that tool. Because like Jody said, you're going to get some shrinkage. You may get a little bit of distortion. So it all depends on what that looks like once that part's pulled. I would let it sit for a few days, make sure it's fully cured out once it's off the plug. And then, yeah, you may have to go back to maybe some areas that need to be lightly sanded or at least completely buffed out to get any minor defects that may come off that plug.
And frequently with a customer that really wants that nice finish, I have them take all of the products that they plan on using and get a nice big piece of glass as a table, a mold surface. And that glass is going to be pretty much perfect, and use all of those products in combination exactly like you think you're going to use them to build that mold, and do different combinations of fabrics, different resins, different thicknesses, maybe a barrier coat, maybe not a barrier coat. Make 4 or 5 samples on this glass so that you can see exactly what they look like, and you're going to know ahead of time what that finish is going to be if you can repeat the same process. Now, what's going to happen? The temperature is going to change. It's going to be 30 degrees colder or 30 degrees hotter on the day you do it. It's going to start raining. It's going to be humid. 2 guys aren't going to show up, and you're going to have a windstorm, and the power is going to go out. So that's just real world stuff that's going to happen. If you're prepared for it and you know it might happen, maybe you just punch out and go home for the day and come back tomorrow, start over. Because it's better on big projects like this to not start than start when you know it's going to be compromised.
All right, we've got a couple more questions. I'm gonna go for a relatively quick answer first. Rob, we talked about Styroshield. Is it compatible with XPS?
Yes, it'll work on that just as well as EPS. So again, should not have an issue with that. And one thing we didn't discuss is applying it. You want to make sure that first pass is just a slight dust coat. Let that gas off. The trick is to make sure we're flashing off all the solvents and not trapping anything between the layers. So dust coat, probably maybe even a second dust coat, and then you can start building up with your 5 to 7 mils and probably 4 to 5 passes. Get enough built on there so you know when you sand, you're not going to burn through it.
This was one of those I mentioned previously. We enjoy working with student groups. We had done some testing with XPS, but we had a student organization who received a donation of XPS, and they were determined, they get whatever they can get. And so they were determined to use it and did a tremendous amount of plug building with the XPS and utilized many of our products and kind of gave us some great feedback on this. So, yep, absolutely. Is it necessary to use surface primer? What happens if we go for high gloss? And I'm going to say that's a high gloss top coat after the base primer. So if a customer wants to go straight from base primer to high gloss top coat, is that a possibility, or do you have to use surface primer, Jody?
It's a possibility. You can spray it over the surface. It won't be as good of a substrate, but it can be used. It's not going to be as durable, just because the base primer is not as durable as the other primers. So the surface could be a little softer, but it doesn't mean it's the wrong way to do it. If you want a one-off high gloss mold and you want to build it quick, that could be the exact right thing to do.
Mhm.
Spray the base primer down, if it's going to be CNC'd or sanded or whatever, and then go right over it with your top coat, that would work.
Excellent. Thanks, Jody. Okay, we've got this great real life case study thanks to Richard. So Richard made a large plug and the cure was not complete, using a polyester resin gel coat brush coat. Sprayed it with PVA, shelved it for a bit. After he gets it cleaned up, what should we do to finish it off and get a nice glossy finish?
And that would be, of course, get all the PVA off there. And you're gonna want, again, start with a small area to find out what sandpaper you need to start with to get the orange peel out of it. But don't sand all the way to the bottom of the orange peel with the coarsest grit. I mean, you may, and there's no right or wrong. There's times you may need to start with 180 grit to knock down some of those high spots. Other times it may be 400. You always want to start with the least aggressive method first. So again, that 1 foot square area or so is going to tell you what you need to know. Start with the least aggressive paper, see how much work it takes, start with a more, then go to more aggressive, and until you get the desired result. But make sure you buff that before you go any further, and that there's no swirls or anything in it. Because if you left any swirls in there, you're going to have to start over. You only want to do that on a small test area, not on a full part or full mold surface.
Okay. And if let's just say that this was my plug, if I kind of got into it and realized that just from a surface profile perspective, it's not in the condition that I want, can I sand down and apply a top coat directly to that and then go from there?
You can apply a top coat, or you can come back and apply a surface primer first to build it up a little bit more, sand it, get it as smooth, get defects out, and then come back with your top coat.
And one thing people ask about is what sandpaper. Most any of our products will hide 80 grit scratches, no problem. So don't be worried about going coarse. You're going to get a better bond by going with coarser grit paper. 180, 150, 120, 80, it's all fine. Sometimes certain situations, one works better than the other. Maybe you have a whole closet full of this stuff, storage area, or you've got a special deal on it, go ahead and use it. There's no right or wrong. But if you start getting 220, 320, 400, now you're getting a surface that's almost too smooth to really bond well to. Not that it won't, but we're looking for long-term durability, and there's no reason to use more than one grit. Just hit it with, if you want something finer, 180 is fine, hit it with 180 and respray it. But 80 grit is my default paper for most any sanding of a substrate that I know I'm going to spray over with something else.
Okay, so I just want to clarify when we're talking about sandpaper, because we've talked about both on the finishing side and on the top coating, or even in between coats. In between coats, in the example of having, some old tooling gel coat on a surface, or perhaps you put down a Duratec primer and now you're going to top coat. We want a relatively solid, rough mechanical tooth to that. So we're going to use a more aggressive sandpaper. On the finishing side, when it comes to selecting a sandpaper, we can start with the finest sandpaper, the finest grit based off of the surface profile we need. Am I capturing that correctly, Rob?
Yes, you are.
Okay. One of the other things that Richard mentioned, and we hear about the 3M AccuSpray gun a lot. It's a fantastic gun. It's got his has a 2.0 millimeter tip, can be exchanged. Those cups can be exchanged so that you can just kind of keep spraying and not worry about the spray gun. We love that gun. We recommend that often. A lot of our distribution partners sell and stock that. We also are very well known for buying a $50 spray gun off of Amazon or Harbor Freight Tools. You can get some excellent results from those without a tremendous investment, particularly if you are on the newer side, perhaps to the materials. That way, if it does kick off, you're not too shocked or concerned over this. Richard, in his question, had also asked kind of what do we recommend in terms of avoiding the spray gun kicking off, and someone else had asked also about pot life, so it kind of ties into this. What are some ways that we can engage best practices for moving through material quickly and spraying without clogging our gun? And is there a way to extend gel time?
We've got the gel time extender just for that purpose. One of the things that happens in the industry is in the lab at 77 degrees in a perfect world, and you're only spraying 100 grams of this product, they got no problem getting it out of the gun. In the real world, where it's 95 or 100 degrees and you've got several gallons that you need to spray, you just don't have time. It's going to cure in the gun way faster than you want it to. So we make a gel time extender that will about double the gel time of the existing product. And it gives you time to actually spray it out of the gun and pay attention to doing a good job, rather than just pulling the trigger and hoping you get it all out of the gun before it sets up. Now, that also allows you to add the correct amount of catalyst, because frequently people start wandering below 1.5% and they're down to 1% or less. Sometimes it'll get hard, but getting hard doesn't mean it cured correctly. It just means that it got hard, and it may not be the surface that you think it is. So stay up there above 1.5%. We recommend 2%. With the gel time extender, that's entirely possible. And it just takes the stress off. So it's one of my best friends.
Yes. All right, Rob, if you don't have the gel time extender, do you have any tips for how to kind of how to play that gel time game?
Yeah, what I tell customers is you want to get the temperature of the material down. So if you know the next day you're going to be spraying this, you can put it in an air-conditioned room. Try to get the temperature down to about 75 degrees or so. A quick way of doing it, take a bucket, put a little bit of ice, cold water in there, set the cans in there while you're stirring it, drop the temperature. As long as you got the temperature down on the material, that's going to give you a little bit more time to get it out of the gun. Doesn't matter what the mold temperature is, because as soon as it comes out of that gun and the thin film and it lays on that mold, you're going to go right back up to the temperature that the mold's sitting at. So if it's 105 degrees out, you're spraying at 75 or 80 degrees, it's going to give you the working time to get it out of the gun before it starts to go, but it's not going to extend the amount of time that it's going to sit on the mold, because now it's back to the high temperature and it's going to go. So yeah, any way you can do it other than reducing the catalyst, because those are the calls we get, especially in the summer, is I sprayed this material and it's been 24 hours and I'm still not getting a full cure on it. And it happens they were at 1%, 1.25%, trying to reduce the amount of time just to be able to get it out of the gun. There's a big difference between how fast it gels in a film versus how fast it's going to gel in a mass.
That's a great
And then
point,
you
Rob.
could, and some shops have other types of catalysts. They have blended catalysts, and those work well to extend the gel time.
Mhm.
And in reality, they give a better cure also. And we've done some testing, and we get higher bar call readings with the top coats and longer gel times, so that can help. And if you don't have it, distributors do carry them, but you may not want to buy a gallon of it for a small project. But if you're working in a shop and they already have some of those on the shelf, it works in our product too.
Absolutely. Good point, Jody. Thank you. All right, our last two questions. I'm going to start with this one. Since the viscosity of our products by and large is lower than a gel coat and higher than an automotive coating or an automotive paint, can we create a better radius or a little sharper radius versus using the tooling gel?
You can, you just got to be careful when you're spraying it, build it up slowly, because the last thing you want to do is start to have some sags or in that radius or in those sharp turns, you start building up where you end up with 40 or 50 mils down there. And that could lead to some cracking, that could lead to a lot more shrinkage, which could lead to pre-release. So you can build it up, you can get a little bit sharper on your radius areas, but you need to build it up and take your time spraying those areas.
And one thing, sometimes when people are using a high density tooling board and they're machining it to very tight tolerances, it can be difficult because sometimes you have to cut it back a little bit to a different shape so you can apply your coatings. One thing that you can do, and I'm not saying this is a solution for all applications, but with a higher density tooling board, you can just put the sealer on there and use that as your mold finish. So it can be, that tooling board can be machined to a very tight tolerance and then just apply the sealer to the surface. The sealer is very low viscosity. It's going to sink in and fill all the low spots, but it's not really going to add anything to the high spots. And you don't have to touch that after the fact. You can use that as your surface, or you can polish it a little bit and get an even nicer surface. So that is an option on tooling board.
Excellent. All right, the last, we've got two more questions. The last one that I'll answer or ask the group here, and then we'll go back to our contact us page. But any solution to get a matte finish? We've been talking about matte a lot internally. There's a lot of desire out there for matte. Is there any solution to get a matte finish?
Well,
Yes and no.
yeah.
Our primers cure with a matte finish. Now, if you want our top coats to cure with a matte finish, you can just add a little bit of wax to them and they will cure with a dull, non-gloss, uniform finish. We also have tested mixing the clear additive into the primers. You will get varying degrees of gloss depending on what you want to do. If you want an in-mold non-gloss finish, the problem is it's going to mirror whatever that surface of the mold is. So if the mold's a high gloss and you're going to spray something in there, it's going to be high gloss. It's going to mirror that finish when you pull the part out. But if you make your mold with a matte finish, whether that's sanding, whether it's applying one of our top coats, whatever look you want, it will come out with a non-gloss finish. But you also run into wax buildup problems and uniformity in repairing it, because every time you touch that surface and polish it, wax it, do whatever, well, as soon as you hit it with a buffer, it's going to be glossy. So it's not a long-term solution, and the industry really wants something like that, but options on our end are limited. So if you do make a rough mold surface with our product, you can do it. It's just that it's not a long-term solution, because in higher production, you're going to run into mold release buildup in that textured surface.
Rob, I feel like this was the theme of your week last week.
Yeah, and we are working with the lab to come up with an additive that will give you a matte finish, but basically down and dirty surfacing agent.
Yeah.
That's been around for years, and that's what everybody uses to get that matte dull look.
And it works better in our products than it does with gel coat. Our products level and flow better to begin with, and they have a better surface cure than gel coat. Gel coat's sticky. Adding wax to just gel coat doesn't guarantee that it's going to be 100% tack free. Our product, if you sprayed it onto a surface and that was the gloss level you wanted, it's ready to go. You don't have to do anything to it. You can just use it as the mold surface once you add your release to it. Whereas gel coat, it doesn't mean it's going to be cured just because you added wax. It becomes a dirt magnet. You can usually wipe it with acetone and still get color off, things like that. So ours at least will give you a very good surface without having to touch it and do anything to it after the fact, but not a great solution for production parts.
Right, right. So maybe coming soon.
Maybe coming, yeah.
Maybe coming soon.
Shelley's working on that.
That's right. All right. Well, our last question actually ties back to this slide. So Dustin asked, do we make shop visits to check in on customers and validate processes? You have all our contact information up there. This has been one of our most interactive webinars, and we do have all of our webinars saved on our website. So you can go back to this one. You can go back and see some of the others that we've done. Jody, Rob, and I try to make ourselves as readily available as possible in person, Dustin, on the phone, by email or text. We also work with a tremendous group of distribution partners, some of whom joined us or are still here on this webinar with us. And so you can reach out and find out who they are and see if we can get you connected with someone, or see what our schedule is like and when we might be back in your area. But our distribution partners are also keen to work with you and keen to help support your process. So whether it's us or one of them, we will make sure that you get the support that you need. So this wraps up our plug and pattern webinar. Jody and Rob, as always, it's such a pleasure to work alongside you and to chat with you on this call. Thank you all for your questions and your comments, and for certainly spending an hour, almost an hour and a half of your day with us. We appreciate it. Reach out, check in with us. Thank you again. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Allie.